Thank you for joining this episode of the Law of Relevancy podcast. I'm Cordzone, your host. Today, we're speaking with Jon Morris. He is a veteran when it comes to agency ownership. He is the founder of one of the most successful digital marketing agencies in the history of digital marketing. And he also is now the founder of Engine BI and Fiscal Advocate. Jon, thank you for joining the show.
Really excited to be here, Cords. Thanks so much.
I'm really excited about our conversation today because of the work that you've been doing lately with Fiscal Advocate and Engine BI. It is one of the things that agency owners think about a lot, or how do they create value in their agency? How do they build in resiliency and make decisions? And it seems like you've addressed all of this head on.
So very excited to be here, talk about those things. And, you'll get into this a little bit later in terms of some of the things, but, I want to make sure we spend our time and our money as agency owners or as professional service owners as intelligently as possible. And what Fiscal Advocate and Engine BI do is they really provide a financial stewardship where we want to make sure that you get the greatest return on your time and your money possible. And so Fiscal Advocate is actually a fractional CFO company specifically helping marketing agencies. And Engine BI is software that gives you budgeting, forecasting, benchmarking, business intelligence insights. And I'm very specific on three metrics that matter. I call it the CPR score. But at the end of the day, I was in a sales pitch about 8 months ago, and someone told me that they're really sophisticated, that they track 315 KPIs every single day.
That sounds
and
crazy.
My feeling is that if you track 315 KPIs, you're really tracking nothing. So it made me think, well, what are the most important KPIs to track? And it's really only three. How much cash you should have relative to your monthly overhead. So you typically want about 2.5 times cash relative to your monthly overhead. So if your monthly overhead's $100,000 a month, you should have $250,000 in the bank minimally. One of my favorite things to mention is Microsoft bought LinkedIn for $26.2 billion in an all-cash deal. So if you have lots of cash, you get to do really cool things. The second metric is your profit margin. A typical agency or professional service company should have a 20% EBITDA relative to revenue. So that means that if you have 10 million in revenue, you should have 2 million in profit. And then the last one is your year-over-year revenue growth should be around 20%. And so these are kind of the gold standards of how you're running your business and how you should be thinking about it. And so everything we do is focused on how do we help you improve those three metrics. We created one score called the CPR score, which is an algorithm that takes those three things into account. Think of it as very similar to like a credit score for you as an individual. This is a credit score for your agency or professional service company.
This, sounds like the way that you've kind of built these fundamental KPIs is extremely important for helping to build resiliency with an agency. But there's so many different types of agencies out there. I'm sure you get the skeptic that might say, well, I'm an all-inclusive agency, or I only deal with this one vertical, and you don't understand because of the cyclical nature of our business or whatever. How do you address those kinds of concerns?
So it's not even just agencies, it's professional service companies in general. The metrics hold whether you are a video production company, a PR firm, a traditional agency, a digital agency, a web development company, a law firm, and an architect. At the end of the day, there are two major components. The first one is how much gross margin you have for selling your time. If you are between 50 and 60%, you're going to be very profitable and be able to invest in your business. If you're above 60%, you are probably screwing somebody over, whether it's your clients or your employees. If you're between 40 and 50%, you have to choose between investing your time back into the business or being profitable. It's going to be hard to do both. And if you're below 40%, just the way the non-client related expenses work, it's going to be really hard to make money. And so I have enough data across many, many different types of professional service companies to know that it stands regardless of the type of business.
How is this going to change in this new world where the billable hour is under attack, basically with all these different AI tools that are making certain tasks and decisions and whatnot so much more efficient?
Look, it's a real threat and it's a real opportunity. And so what you need to be thinking about is how are you going to take advantage of that, or uh, or you potentially are going to lose clients. So what I would say is I don't know if it's the billable hour as much as your churn is potentially going to go up dramatically if you're going to get replicated with AI. And so, uh, in every type of professional service company, my recommendation is to really understand what could AI do and expect it to do it. And so how are you going to make sure that you're prepared for that? And that's where budgeting and forecasting is really important, and investing in R&D to make sure that you stay relevant with new technology that's going to be disruptive.
It seems like it's really a moving target right now with how
It
fast
is
things
like
are
I'll
growing.
give you a real example. A lot of people are now using Chat GPT as opposed to Google for a lot of their searching. And what happens if all of our searching moves more towards a chat bot as opposed to a search engine? Will that, those advertising dollars still be there, or is there going to be a different method? What won't go away is the desire to have, people reach an audience to generate more customers. What will go away is the amount of manual work that's necessary to potentially get it done. There might be the ability to do more in-house versus outsourcing. And so those are the things you have to be strategically thinking about.
Well, when we talk about this innovation and how fast things are changing, are there other components below the CPR score that are also important? Like how do you take a look at measuring innovation or those types of things where the ability for an agency to adapt to the changing market is a big deal?
Yeah. Yeah. So if you think about it, like when I talk about the CPR score and I talk about revenue growth, I talk about 20% consistent year over year revenue growth. And so if you think that your service is going to be in less demand in 3 years from now, now's your time to invest in R&D to make it so that you're ready for that changed environment. But yeah, under revenue, there's only three types of revenue. There's new business, there's renewals, and there's upsells. And so in each one of these areas, what you're trying to do is get to the least amount of KPIs to analyze to determine how you're doing. And so what you're talking about is two things. One, down the road, making sure that you can still win new business and that you're relevant, and that you also want to make sure that you have a really good renewal strategy and that you're going to keep that book of business. And so I'm a big believer in constantly investing in innovation to make sure that you are relevant down the road.
I'm thinking about, some of the problems that you're solving and addressing with some of your software and findings. And, one of the things you talk about in some of your books and your writings and your thought leadership is the importance of setting goals.
Yep.
What is the best way to set goals in this type of environment where, like there's the old adage of an agency year is really only like 3 or 4 months with how fast things move? Like how often?
What do you mean by that?
Like for example, think back to your life in agency and how quickly things would change or how hard everybody's working across all the clients. There's this saying that says, well, an agency year is really 4 months in terms of, it's like a dog year, so to speak.
Yeah.
Where it just feels like in a normal company, working in an agency can go way faster. And it relates to the workload itself as well as the grind,
Yeah. So, I mean, a couple things. One, I have a saying that it can't be a goal unless you put budget against it. And I'm just going to give you a good example. A lot of people come to me based on the success I had at Rise and say that they want to grow faster. And so I asked them one simple question. I was like, what % of your revenue do you spend on sales and marketing?
Yeah.
And I oftentimes get an answer is like, oh, I don't spend anything on sales and marketing. It's all word of mouth. And so in my opinion, that is someone who doesn't really want to grow.
Yeah.
And so when you think about what your goals are, if growth is an important goal, well, then you should be investing in sales and marketing. If you want to have a unique value proposition and be different, then you really have to spend time understanding what makes you different, but then you have to invest in actually being different.
Yeah. Telling
And
people about it.
so that's why I'm such a big fan of budgeting, is because it is your strategic plan. Everyone has a strategic plan, whether they know it or not. It's what you put your money against.
What do you recommend during the budgeting process in terms of communication internally with the team? A lot of times those decisions are made at very high levels or within a management group. But how do you feel about communication across the team with what we're doing?
I believe in a lot of transparency. So I share my revenue goals, I share my profit, I share actuals, I share the financials with the company. So when you develop a plan, generally there are four elements to your plan. There is a revenue goal, there is a profit goal, there's a cash goal, and there's an infrastructure goal. I don't always share cash. It's the only one that I've been less comfortable with than the other three. But, let's just say that you're preparing for 2025 and you want to have an amazing 2025. You're going to say, look, here's our revenue goal. We did, 10 million last year. We're hoping to do 13 million this year. It's going to come from this much in new business, this much from renewals, this much from upselling existing customers. We're going to really work on maintaining that 20% growth or that 20% profit margin. So that's what our profit goal is. So it's 2.6 million. And then from a investment standpoint, we want to make sure that we have an amazing 2026. So we think that there's a really cool opportunity with this new service, or we think that we can make our existing services better and improve the retention rate. And so these are the investments we're going to make. And so by being able to spell that out really simply, there are four goals that we're trying to achieve: a revenue, profit, cash, and infrastructure. I think that helps bring people together and get them aligned with what you're trying to achieve, for the entire year. You want to be part of the story. So the more you communicate, the more you get people to feel like they're part of that story, as opposed to, just kind of doing a cog in a wheel type of job.
No, I'm a big proponent of that. We try to do that where we can, for sure. One of the things that you hit on earlier that I'm very curious about is sales and marketing. For me,
Yep.
Marketing is not that heavy of a lift, but it's always been a challenge to have a sales force, because especially, coming from an agency like Rise Interactive, I imagine there's all kinds of different projects you might work on, huge variety of things that might require expertise during the sales process. How do you actually get over that hump of, I assume if you're working with salespeople, they may or may not have the expertise, because it's hard to be sort of an engineer or an expert in one of these things, but
Yep.
also be a salesperson, where salespeople are very good at follow-up and very good at reaching new people and things like that. Like, how do you solve that challenge of creating an effective sales force?
So a couple of things. One, there are different stages to your sales force. So there are your typical hunters that are going to networking events, taking people out for drinks, building relationships with them, playing golf, all that type of stuff. And those people need to have some cursory knowledge, but they don't have to be like core experts in your business. And then there are your closers. What I have found, and I generally tell people, is that your best salespeople already work for you. They're doing the client work. So I believe it is easier to take someone who is an expert at digital marketing or whatever practice you offer from a marketing perspective and give them sales training than it is to take a salesperson and train them to be an excellent digital marketer. And so we would recruit very heavily internally to convert people to the sales track.
Especially with your background in the CFO role, what are some compensation models that you found that have worked in when you apply that kind of a methodology?
To sales
Yeah,
specifically.
like maybe giving commissions to people who might be web developers to help with the
So,
technical
I
sales
mean,
process.
I'm a big believer that the role has to be a dedicated role. So I'm not a fan of shared roles. So it's like if you are going to, let's just say, create a role and you have a web development practice, and there is someone who's charismatic, a strong presenter, understands your web development practice incredibly well, and has great, let's just say organizational skills, they could be a good candidate to join your sales team. Uh, Oftentimes the pitch is that they can make more money because salespeople make a lot of money if they do a good job. Typically, what will happen is 50% of their compensation will be their base, 50% will be commission. You first figure out what their sales quota is. So let's just say you want them to bring in $1 million worth of business and you want them to make $100,000 a year in total compensation and 50,000 is their base. Well, that means that $50,000 is going to be their commission. And so you take the 50,000 and divide it by their sales quota of $1 million. And that's how you get the percent that you would give them in commission. So in this case, it would be a 5% commission plus $50,000 base.
I think it may have misunderstood your story about how you've got your hunters that need the cursory knowledge and then you have your experts. I was thinking more along the lines of, let's say you've got your hunters out there doing the networking, doing the relationship building and whatnot. And then let's say they found somebody, they're interested in learning more. They've heard good things about your agency. And so you bring them to the agency. I assume that the commission is for the salesperson, but does the experts that are brought into the sales process?
No, I generally, if you're on the client service team, sales is a team sport in the marketing world because they want to meet the person who's going to work on the deal. They want to meet the team. And so they're oftentimes involved in that sales process. When you bring the subject matter expert in, generally they're compensated more on the bonuses and the delivery of the work that they do as opposed to the commission for winning new business.
I like the way you've got it split out there. It seems very fair.
Yep.
In some of your writings, you talk about the 2 questions that every business owner needs to answer to be able to differentiate themselves. What are those questions?
So there are 120,000 agencies just in the United States. And what I like to tell people is that none of us are special. A lot of people don't like hearing that, but that's the reality. No matter how great we think we are, our competition thinks that they're just as good. And oftentimes, there's not a huge difference between us and them. And so the 2-question test is to put you on a path to really come up with a real differentiator. So if I ask an agency owner, what makes them unique? I have found that generally 1 of 5 answers comes up. Our creative is amazing. We care more. You get great customer service. You get to talk to more senior people. We're data driven. That's kind of like the core group of answers. And so my follow-up question, so that's the first question, is what makes you unique? The second question is, that's awesome. I just met with 49 other agencies, and they also said that they're data-driven. So how are you more data-driven than they are? And if you can't answer that second question, you don't have a differentiator. And this goes back to where budgeting comes into play, is if you want to be data-driven, well, now you have to invest in actually being data-driven as opposed to just using it as a marketing line. And I'll give you an example. Rise's vision was to leverage data to help brands make smarter marketing decisions. It's a very long-winded way of saying we were data-driven. Now, if someone asked me, I was like, that's awesome. 49 other companies said that they're data-driven. How are you more data-driven than them? My response was that data is a broad word, that there's media data, customer data, consumer data, pricing data, inventory data, and we chose to be the best at media data. And we spent 8 figures on a platform that could identify waste faster than anybody else could in terms of media that was being allocated poorly and was getting you a negative ROI. And we also were able to identify positive ROI places where there was still room to spend more money. And so that was one method of how we use media data to differentiate ourselves. The second thing was, in order to get a job at Rise, before you were even allowed to interview, you had to take an analytics exam, and it had a 22% pass rate. And I would always explain to people, our people are not smarter than our competition. Like our competition, we have respect for them, and we believe that they have brilliant people. However, in aggregate, I would say that our people are substantially more analytical than our competition because we put so much emphasis on hiring for analytical capabilities. And so if you're going to be data driven, you need to have a data driven platform that gives you insights, and you need to have a team that is analytical that can dive into those insights to come up with, good decisions to make out of it. And so that's an example of what I want marketing agencies to really think about, is what makes them unique. But then you got to make it real. You got to invest in it. And it's a multi-year process to make it real. We've built Engine BI, and it's a phenomenal platform, and it's providing a ton of value. But I have a laundry list of things that I want to do to add to the platform so that the product is better a year from now than it is today.
Well, obviously that goal setting with your product development is incredibly important, but also looking back and understanding your benchmarks and whether or not you're hitting your own benchmarks, or maybe even understanding what's happening in the marketplace. Where do you stand on benchmarking?
So it's a big part of what the platform does. As I mentioned to you before, I talk about 20% growth, 20% EBITDA. Every marketing agency, if you understand the benchmarking numbers, knows how much to spend, and as well as how much other people are typically spending. So give you an example. Typically, a marketing agency spends 8% of their revenue on sales and marketing. I want you to spend more. I want you to have a competitive advantage when it comes to sales and marketing. So if you can spend 12% of your revenue on sales and marketing and your competitors are spending 8%, assuming you spend that money intelligently, you should grow faster. Conversely, 15% of the revenue is typically spent on operations and finance, which is HR, legal, corporate IT, general administrative expenses in your finance. I'd love to figure out how you could spend 12% as opposed to 15%. And so by understanding the benchmarks of what people spend in each specific department in each specific area, it allows you to think about how you can be strategic and spend that money in a more intelligent and effective way.
It is interesting when you look at how much you recommend spending on sales and marketing as an agency owner, because to be frank, that's what we're asking our clients to do.
Exactly.
We should be able to ask ourselves to do the same thing.
I used to have a line when I was at Rise, and I was like, how come I'm the only marketer that believes in marketing? And because I always found it amazing that people would own all these marketing agencies, but didn't do any investments in marketing themselves.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. I mean, if you think about the way a lot of us ended up with agencies too, it may have started in your living room. It may have been one person that then became 2 and 3 and 4. And so a lot of times it's not like you were building a manufacturing plant where you knew what you were creating when you got started. And so you're now having to retrofit these best practices into a model that maybe was never intended or planned on being as big as you are. So I think I really like your message of the science of decision making. I mean, and what's really impressive about this conversation today is that you're basically communicating some very specific numbers when you're talking about the bucketing of this information and everything, and how much, for example, we should send in sales and marketing. For me as an agency owner, I can tell you that one of my biggest, we're really focused on quality. We're trying to provide ROI, and one of the things that we try to do is really make sure that we're only bringing on business that we can service, because the last thing in the world we want to do is bring on business that we don't have the resources to service. And so a lot of times that throttles us back. What is your recommendation for agencies like ours that, loves to dream about the idea of growing bigger, faster, but we also have these challenges of but we need to make sure we can do the work?
So a couple things. One, if there's something that's keeping you from taking on more business, I would think of that as like one of your infrastructure goals. So for example, uh, you might not have the recruiting infrastructure, or you might not have the training infrastructure. So if you can win more business, but you're saying no because I don't think I can service the customers well, then I want you to think about what investments you need to make to improve the infrastructure so that you do a solid job. So that'll be the one thing I would say in that regard. Um, and, you know, in terms of the idea of the science of decision making, at the end of the day, all of us have a boss, and that boss is completely objective. And that boss is the income statement. And so you're either showing top line revenue growth and healthy profits, or you're not. And so the question is, what decisions do you need to make sure that you make your boss happy every single year in and out? And that's where the CPR score is so valuable, is because if it provides you with a guideline or a framework of how you should spend your time. So I am very okay with, you don't need to grow at 100% a year every single year in and out, but you should be able to invest to grow 10 to 20% a year. And by the way, if you can do that consistently, you'll build an amazing business. And so I'm ultimately an incrementalist, where I want you to have constant incremental improvement to your business.
No, that's a really, really good advice. And I'd love to talk to you more about some of these things and learn more about what Engine BI does and follow up with you on some of those items. Where can people follow you and keep track of what you're doing with your product development and your new product?
Yeah, so you can go to enginebi.net, and there you can learn about the software, as well as I have a mastermind program that teaches you how to grow your CPR score. You can go to fiscaladvocate.com, which is the fractional CFO services to help you really have great financial stewardship and make sure that you're profitable, growing your cash, and spending your money intelligently. And then lastly, follow me on LinkedIn. I post very frequently on different strategies and methods to help you increase your CPR score. And you're always welcome to email me at jon@enginebi.net.
Well, Jon, we're definitely going to follow you in those places, and you can follow us anywhere where podcasts are found on the Law of Relevancy social media feeds, as well as Bake More Pies social media. Thank you for joining us, Jon. We really appreciate your time today.
Thank you. By the way, best name ever with Bake More Pies. I love it.
We're going to use that clip. Thanks, Jon.
Absolutely.
Have a great day. See y'all next time.